Hi, I'm Nancy Chanteau, and this is a reading from Access to Power, a radical approach for changing your life, our new book. And this is a section that's based on a question somebody asked about cultural appropriation and whether or not you can do a reverse appropriation when um, marginalized communities are taking some cultural element from the mainstream culture and making it theirs. So what is that a problem as well, or is appropriation only a problem when it is from oppressive mainstream culture toward marginalized cultures? So I'm going to read from a sidebar in the book today. It's called The Language of Power. I'll read the whole sidebar. It's a little long, so bear with me. And then I will talk about appropriation in the context, the way we're framing this. So this is something I wrote. Subtle language codes are among the ways one-up people flex their power muscles. New York City isn't just another city, it's the city, as if it's the only city in the world. Such a claim on the general, normal, and commonplace is a coded act of power. The majority in the United States ought to be based on specific issues and values and composed of a collection of voters, but the word minority doesn't refer to a quantity of people. It refers to a racial classification defined by those with the greatest power. If people of color are minorities, then the majority is white people, or to be even more specific, white conservative Christian men. But in many, many geographic locations, white folks are a minority in population. They get to claim the term majority because white people in the United States still hold the majority of the power. The term American is another such claim on the general. The North and South American continents contain many nations, peoples, and cultures, yet in the media and around the world, American means a U.S. citizen, a person who lives in a single country on one of these continents. Likewise, in many map views of the world, the North American continent is depicted as proportionally larger than it is, and it is often centered in the visual field. These subtle cues suggest that the United States is at the center of the world, even though it is a relatively small landmass and takes up a small percentage of the total planetary surface. As we discussed earlier in the book, the elite of the hegemony, the people with the biggest army and greatest brute strength, have the power to name and define their world. These types of coded signals of power might be invisible to the ones who benefit from the privilege of that power, but they tend to be aggressive and threatening to those who are oppressed. In the late 20th century, there was much discussion of political correctness, a somewhat negative term for the social and even legal pressure on people to use inclusive language. As skills for change practitioners, we do our best to name the power at play in a given transaction, stand up for the folks at the bottom of the power hierarchy, and use language that shows our care for all beings. Thus, it might take a negotiation to discover how someone prefers to use language, and then to memorize and learn the proper use of the new term. For example, my friend's daughter has selected a more gender-neutral name and has also asked people to use as few pronouns as possible, preferring they use a name instead of she and her. When we do this extra work, we show our respect for other people's dignity, personal power, and right to claim language to define their world. And such gestures of respect create radical change in how we think, speak, and behave. So this sidebar wasn't about cultural appropriation, where people who have one cultural identification, perhaps white-skinned, perhaps middle class in the United States, might appropriate or take another person's cultural expression in a particular context. For example, we just went through Halloween, and a lot of people dress up in Day of the Dead makeup and Day of the Dead costumes for Halloween or on the day after Halloween. Celebrate Day of the Dead celebrations. There's also a woman I know, Jacqueline Keeler, who is doing a lot of work to fight Native American mascotry in sports. And what they find is that when people's cultures are taken by somebody who comes from a mainstream culture, the mainstream norm group, and that take is not something that the person who is privileged generally is particularly aware of as a take, that it actually affects the self-esteem of the people who are being taken from. And of course, that is in a situation where there's a power differential, where somebody who is part of the cultural majority, for example, or the non-marginalized group, gets to claim the power of normal and gets to say what they're doing is no big deal. And the person who is in a marginalized group, no matter how they feel, is told that their feelings are unimportant or don't matter. And we just don't, in Skills for Change, we don't think that way. We think that if somebody in a lower power position says there's something wrong with something, we want to listen. And that doesn't mean that everybody should stop dressing in Day of the Dead outfits. It means that you need to be incredibly appreciative of the culture that you're honoring. If you're honoring a culture, you need to be understand that culture well enough to understand whether or not your behavior would be acceptable in that culture. For example, wearing a headdress, something that is being sold for $10.99 on a Halloween website and seems innocuous, or something that, if you're a rapper, it's no big deal to wear it on stage. That 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 headdress, if used in the cultural context, would only be something worn by somebody who had been granted that authority to wear that headdress. Every feather has meaning. The process by which a headdress comes to be worn is something that is a ceremony of great value to that person, and nobody in that culture would think it was okay to dress up. Okay, so you find out and you listen. And if somebody says, hey, that what you did didn't feel good, then, especially if you're in a majority group, in a group where you get to make your experience normal and you're not used to having to think about your effect on other people, if you want to operate like a Skills for Change practitioner, you'll make your power transparent, you'll listen to others, and if they say, please stop, you'll stop. And you'll find out in what context it's okay to do your behavior and what context it isn't. Okay, so I hope that helps. Thanks.